Welcome back to the Burrows of Berea. I am Rick Welch, and I have a special guest for you guys today. This is somebody that I met on Facebook, but usually it was in through some comments that were going back and forth between people. And I kept seeing some of these links that he would send, and I went and looked at it, and I was like, "What is this?" So our guest is Michael Bull. He's an Australian author, theologian, and graphic designer based in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney. Australia. He is the creator and editor of the Bible Matrix, a project exploring the literary and structural DNA of Scripture through chiastic and typological patterns that he believes reveal the unified design of God's Word. Bull's work blends biblical theology with symbolic interpretation, emphasizing covenantal structure and temple imagery across both testaments. He has written several books, including Bible Matrix and Introduction to the DNA of the Scriptures, and operates Bull's Bible School in Kenya, which supports biblical education for pastors and leaders. His writings reflect a postmillennial and covenantal hermeneutic rooted in a high view of biblical typology and fulfillment. And so, without further ado, introducing Mr. Michael Bull. Hello, Michael.
G'day, how you going, Rick? From memory, the first comment you responded to of mine, I was just particularly rude.
Oh, yeah?
I think I sort of snapped back at something somebody said, and your response, I just was so gracious. I thought, wow, that's how I need to interact today. I just, you know,
Well, I
so
mean, and you explained yourself, you go to the pub and you have some words with people and then
yeah.
you shake hands and go home. But when we're online, we don't get to do the shaking hands part.
Well, no, that's right. And as I like to say, if we were doing this, we're debating over beers at a pub, we could have an actual brawl.
Yeah. Yeah, and
You know,
I would probably be even kinder in that situation.
oh, you would. I have no doubt you would. Yeah, look,
Yeah.
certainly a place for that. Yep, definitely.
Yeah. Well,
Mm.
I really appreciate you being willing to take your time up. I know you're 16 hours ahead of me. It's about 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here, so that puts you up pretty late. What time is it there?
It's just past 10 p.m. But look,
Oh.
this is no, but after 9 p.m. for me is prime time. So
Oh, good. Yeah.
that's when I'm sharpest. That's when I get my best work done. So,
Uh, Yeah.
it's very good. Yep.
Yeah, and as my great friend Elaine Clark, she lives in Spain, but she's English, and she
Yep.
says, "I'm ready and cracking to go, Rick."
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Let's get cracking. Yeah, we
But
we use that one. Yeah,
that's
that's good.
awesome. Well, one
Yeah.
of the things that I asked you up front is that I just for a little bit, I'd just like to hear a little bit of your story about how you came into the faith, because all of us have a similar story where we meet Jesus somewhere in our life and our lives begin to change. And so, can you tell me a little bit about
Yep.
that?
Yeah, I was raised in the Anglican Church. I sort of there were some pretty what's the word? I know there were real Christians in the church, but I think for my family it was pretty nominal. So it's just something that they always did, and that was good. I mean, even at that stage they were still using sort of a bit of the old liturgy that they would recite. We'd read it off cards, and of course that when you were saying something like that every week, it stays with you. So we went to Sunday school and learned all the Bible stories. um, and Yeah, I think that I went to an Anglican school from year 5 and private school. That was good. I think I was just really searching when I got into high school,
Hmm.
and I thought the answer's in here somewhere. And looking back, I think that that had to be the Lord, because only the Lord can give you that sort of desire to
Hmm.
not just most students were just like, yeah, it's okay, it's just culture. We had chapel services at school, and in reasonably impressive looking chapel. It was pretty old school, it's like 100 years old at the time, I think. So yeah, and I had a few teachers who were vocal Christians, which was fine. It was part of the school culture, and I remember asking them questions, and I kind of struggled with assurance. Yeah, and then I met some very well, I actually dropped out of school. I didn't finish school. I just couldn't cope a lot with a lot of it. I found out years later that I have Asperger's, but that
Hmm.
wasn't until my 40s. So,
Yeah.
I
Wow.
did really well in some things at school and terribly in others, and just, yeah. But then anyway, I went and got a job in a print shop, which I absolutely loved. And one of the ladies there, who was the graphic artist kind of person, at well, the way things were then before desktop publishing, she and her husband used to do these Christian talks. He'd put these slideshows together on different things, and they'd go and visit people's homes and friends and have these talks. And I thought, wow, I really dig this stuff. They were real rough diamonds, and a bit odd, but and there was one guy there who was reformed, and I thought, oh, I really like the way this guy talks about stuff. Anyway, so that sort of got me into so the sort of into the reformed stuff. But in the late 80s, I just remember picking up by accident David Chilton's Revelation commentary in a Christian bookstore, which I still think is really weird that they had it. Like it was a pretty run of the mill sort of
The
a Christian
Days of
bookstore,
Vengeance, Days of
and
Vengeance, right?
that's the one. And I remember reading it and thinking, wow, I was familiar with a historicist, viewpoint on Revelation, but when I was reading this, I thought, this makes sense.
Hmm.
This guy's tying it all together. He's actually making sense of things. Um, and so that sort of got me on that path. Eventually, that led me eventually to James Jordan, and I listened to his Revelation lectures, and that's where he shared these patterns, the creation pattern, which is relates to the pattern of the Israel's annual feasts, and also to the way he used Revelation to go back to as a window on the whole Bible, basically, just to
Hmm.
go back and show where all of these things were like hyperlinks. And I thought, I'd listened to a few other people on Revelation. I mean, that I was familiar with Chilton, Gentry, some Gary DeMar. Listening to Jordan and the way he dealt with the imagery, I thought, he's nailed it. Like,
Hmm.
this is it for me. Like,
Right.
you know,
Hmm.
yeah. So, and then I was on their forum for quite a few years. They're really lovely, gracious guys. They put up with me, which was very nice. So look, that's basically, it. I think it's just, I think I've always Chilton's book just showed me the power of Scripture. I think
Hmm.
that was the thing. It's like, right, this guy he's not just taking verses and building on those. He's actually showing how the whole thing works. And I think Jordan took that to the next level for me. So
I
yeah, that
noticed
was it.
that.
And then of course
Yeah.
I was yeah, I just have this thing. Someone said, Michael, you just can't help teaching. You just don't shut up. Like so
Right.
and I was teaching with a bunch of other guys at the local high school. We still have some Bible teaching in public schools here. There's people trying to get rid of it, but it's still hanging on. And yeah, just sharing some of this stuff with unchurched high school kids, and they got it. They seem to get it better than some Christians do. So that was fun. Did that for quite a while. But anyway, so yeah, no, it's just been, blogging and whatever. I've got quite a few friends who are much more well read than I am,
Hmm.
and they're very helpful. They'll say, "Oh, well, such and such said that," and I thought, "Oh, that's good to know." So they're very much appreciated. Yeah, but anyway, look, the Bible's just such an exciting book. It's just there's always more to see, and um, you know. And I think the biggest
Yes.
thing I try to get across to people is that the Bible has a very ironic sense of humor, and sometimes we just don't get the jokes.
Yeah, you know what?
It's
That is the case for me. I noticed, when I saw, and we'll get into this in a little bit about the shape of, the things that you write, like of
mm,
Isaiah and of Deuteronomy. Those are things that are lost on us, in our English translations. We don't see it. We don't see how,
mm,
how it was written out. We don't. And I say we, I mean those of us who are uneducated, in Hebrew or in Greek, or how the Hebrew mind worked and how they, spoke with one another and
mm,
how the writings worked. And so I knew
yep,
when I first saw your work, I was like, okay. And I had read James Jordan's Handwriting on the Wall, and I remember my first take on James Jordan was this guy is on a level I don't even know where to begin with this because he's seeing things I didn't see. but I like the
Yeah.
way that he presents it. He's such a he. There's a lot of humility there, and I like how the
Mm,
way that he
yep.
shares it and gives it. He wants everyone to see what he's seeing, and and
Mm,
and I
yep.
and I see that in you too. I know that you can be, to take a pun on your name, bullish. I know you can be at times like, nope, this is how it is, but also I can understand
Mm,
where you are, where you've been educated so far in your life, that you want to share it so that people can actually see it, so that they can miss some of the pitfalls that a lot that we get in the world today, especially in theology circles.
yeah, I've mellowed a lot.
Yeah.
I, I look at some of the stuff I wrote maybe 10 years ago and I think, oh, Michael, like there's just no patience I mean, I don't attack people, but I tend to attack ideas, but
Right.
people don't,
Absolutely.
you know, and if someone comes at me full on, I just take it as, oh, okay, I need to defend my position. It's all very, it's not personal,
Hmm.
so. But I'm becoming, more patient, and also too, I think just realizing, and Peter Lightheart's been an influence on me in that regard. He's just so patient and gracious with people
Hmm.
of different opinions, and he's look, we all are brothers and sisters, and we all are helping each other along. Theology is a group project. Everybody's got something to offer, and to recognize that, and then to not be as sort of as confrontational as I used to be, or put it another way, to be confrontational, but to wrap it in grace. Just
Right.
just like it's like, look, and that's to me, that sort of takes a bit of time. I just want to get right to the point. That's my thing. It's not that
Hmm.
I'm trying to be rude. It's just like, here it is. But none of us really respond to that really well. So
It
yeah, but
reminds
but
me. It
also too,
reminds me of the
my thing is to
story.
just encourage. Sorry. Yep.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I didn't mean, it reminds me of that story where, it's a novel about the world in 2D, and then suddenly a 3D object shows up in that 2D world, and they're trying to
Oh,
define it. Sometimes when I see your
yeah.
comments, like I'll see a comment come in and I'll think, he's in the 3D world. Like I don't understand. Like I'm going to need you to explain that sphere to me because I see a circle. And so that's what it feels like sometimes with
Mm,
people like Jordan or you or Lightheart. I mean, like you said, the patience and the kindness goes a long way. It helps us. But there's sometimes when I see things and I'm like,
yep.
okay, I'm uneducated. I don't understand what that sphere is. I can't, I need you to help me see that. And that's why I wanted to meet you and talk to you, because I'm fascinated by this. And and the other reason why I really wanted to meet you is because of a response you gave to me. I said to you, I said, Michael, the reason I'm a full preterist and I have reasons why. It's not because I'm being obstinate. It's not because I
Mm,
just want to be right. It has
yeah.
nothing to do with any
Yep.
of that. It's that I've seen something now, the imminency of those particular time texts
Mm,
hit me and
yep.
mattered to
Yep.
me. And then when I saw it being able to be shown in a fulfilled light, it didn't make sense to me
Mm,
in my physical reality. It didn't make sense to me because I was like, I I have a like this disconnect between my physical reality and what I know to be true spiritually. But I also saw that in the scriptures too, when Jesus would talk to like the woman at the well or talk to his disciples and say
mm,
things and they just
yep.
weren't getting it. And I thought, perhaps that's what's happening to me. And so that's why I was being honest with you. And I was like, there's a reason why I am this way. And, I believe
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yep.
I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ with all of my heart. He saved me, the wretch
Mm,
that I was, and he has remained with me. And I'm reading
mm,
this to be true. And I'm like, okay, I know that I can learn and grow. I know that happens. I get that. So
mm.
I want to talk to Michael and see what it is that you're seeing and why you're so vehemently opposed to this idea, and then just get a good grasp of it. That's why I wanted to meet you to start with. So
Oh no, and I really appreciate that. I I believe that the structure of the Bible is the answer to the question, because God works in the same way all the time. He in the same sequence. It's a
mm,
sequence of specified steps that he takes, which the first time we see it is in Genesis 1, and that sets the foundation for everything that he does. And
mhm.
So it was, Jordan sort of picking up on this thing. He sort of saw this pattern as um, sort of quite common in scripture, but I see it as ubiquitous. Like the entire thing, it's like Leviathan scales. Like this pattern is working at every level simultaneously. It's in a like a fractal,
Yes.
it's like broccoli. I like to say Romanesco broccoli. It's the same pattern at every level, and there's no part of it that is not following this structure in some way. It's
Hmm.
it's like a crystalline pattern, and it explains why the text is often weird and jumps around and has abrupt changes, and it seems like a shambles sometimes. Yeah, looking at I've been working on Isaiah, and just that book, it just looks like it was thrown together because there's no discernible rhyme or reason for its arrangement. And yet I thought, based on what I got from Chilton, it's like, no, no, that's not the right attitude. There's something
Hmm.
going on here, you know, and
Yes.
and 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 the Lord does that. He doesn't tell you. It's like he's like the best movie directors just kind of show you stuff and like, okay, you figure it out. Like,
Yeah.
what's actually happening here. You put the pieces together. I want you to think. I want you to join the dots. So I think that structure is the answer to the debate over full preterism versus partial preterism, and I it shows where the full preterists are right over the partial preterists, and and
Hmm.
and the partial preterists have been accused of being inconsistent, where the same language is used, and they say, oh no, that's talking about different events, and that's clearly not the case. Like there's,
Hmm.
using the same language would indicate that they're talking about the same event. However, the same structure also shows where full preterists, uh, uh, where 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 they fall apart. Like it doesn't go far enough. It,
Hmm.
it it shows that there are some texts that they have to truncate into AD 70 that actually don't, and they're not the texts that are sort of the partial preterists, some of them try to claim,
Hmm.
but there are but the main thing too is just the architecture of the whole thing shows you that God does work in layers, and um, why there are numerous instances where, and also the symmetrical shape of sacred history, that show that's this to be the case. There is an architecture, and um, and it's the same thing you see in miniature in the shape of Isaiah, and well, in any biblical book, really, they all follow basically the same structure. There's a few variations on it, usually to make some kind of point.
Hmm.
But once you see it, it is like suddenly putting on 3D glasses, and all of a sudden, oh, this is a pop-up book. This book's not flat.
Yes.
This book has a shape,
Hmm.
and once you know the tune, once you know the pattern, then you start to see it. And of course, the best thing for me was like seeing Jordan show how Revelation follows uh Israel's annual harvest calendar, and
Hmm.
also the pattern of conquest from Genesis to Judges, and all of those things are the same process expressed in different media, whether it's the
Hmm.
calendar or the architecture of the tabernacle, or whatever. And then, of course, sometimes he will say things, and other people have mentioned this as well. Jordan will say something, and you think, nah, that's crazy. Now, sometimes I think he is crazy. I don't agree with him on everything. Um, but the funny thing is, the way that the reasons that in places where I disagree with him, it's because I'm applying other things that I've learned from him, and
Hmm.
I'm a systems guy. He's sort of like, oh, look, here's the pattern again, and it's all a bit casual. Whereas I'm like, no, this is absolutely crystalline, and there are no gaps. That is the guardrails, or the train tracks of the scriptures that um, keep the interpreter on the path. Like the structure is the container that is a channel of meaning as well. So the
Hmm.
location of something is given its meaning by it gives it something its meaning. So yeah, if you look at Revelation, for instance, instead of just being a bunch of random stuff that it talks through, it's meticulously working through this pattern. And and once you know the sequence, you kind of go, oh, this should be next. Oh, there it is. But also too, you look at it and go, oh, I see what you did there. I knew what was
Hmm.
coming next in general terms, but now I see what you've done with it in this particular for this particular purpose.
Hmm.
And it's God is the best at writing sequels. When people want a sequel, they want the same experience again, but it has to be a totally different story,
Right.
and which is pretty hard to pull off. But God does it every time. Every new development in Scripture, it's really the same thing again, but in a totally different way. And he
Mm.
takes it to the next level. He ups the stakes, and generally the devil does that as well. My
Mm.
favorite example is before the flood. The Canaanites basically abolished worship, like they stopped sacrificing.
Hmm.
Sin was paid for with blood. It was vengeance. That was it. Um,
Right.
but after the flood, the devil's attack changed, and it was the Tower of Babel. It was false religion, and that sort of
Hmm.
started syncretism. So the devil ups his game as well. And so, but what the Lord does is it's because the devil keeps upping his game, and we see it happening today as well. Um, God's people have to develop new wisdom each time.
Hmm.
So when people say, well, cultural Marxism's not Marxism, like, no, it's more subtle. It's
Mm.
the same
Okay.
thing, but he's coming at us from a different angle.
Hmm.
How, say same-sex marriage, and then all of a sudden we have to say, oh, how do we defend marriage? We always just took that as a given. We have to go
Hmm.
back to this drawing board, and so God just keeps throwing curve balls, and Billy gets the devil to do it. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
these
That's for
these things
sure.
come in, and we yeah, and it also too tends to purify the church.
Hmm.
Allowing the serpent into the garden is always for our ultimate benefit.
Hmm.
That's the key. It's as I like to say, the book of Genesis is just a game of snakes and ladders. Like,
Right. Yeah.
you've got the serpent
Yeah.
in the garden, and then you've got Jacob's ladder. And the thing with the Bible is that the snakes often look like ladders, and the ladders often look like snakes. And you have
Mm.
to the only way you can discern between them is by what God told you, and
Okay.
otherwise the things don't always look like what they are. I mean, the serpent in the garden offered a ladder. Hey, you can be
Hmm.
like God, but he was a serpent. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And the good thing is that the Bible's really consistent once you sort of figure out how to join the dots and how these sequence. God recapitulates things all the time, the same sequences. Um, so once you sort of see it, it's and Peter Lightheart said that too. He said it's like getting a joke. Well, you make the connection in your mind, like the comedian leaves something out, but it's
Hmm.
something that he knows that and you make the connection, and then you go, "Oh, I get it." And he said that's why a good interpretation is less like dissecting a frog than it is like getting a joke. It's not, we're
Yes.
not just taking this thing apart. You actually have to have a sort of a sense of humor or something that can put these things together, because the Bible does that. It doesn't spoon feed us all the time.
Do you ever feel like your soap is doing more harm than good? Well, I did too. Then I found Halfback Mountain Soaps. Born from one person's search for a better bar of soap, these are as pure as a mountain stream. No chemicals, no drying agents, just simple, skin loving ingredients like shea butter, olive oil, coconut oil, and castor oil. Each bar is handcrafted and scented naturally with things like lavender, cinnamon spice, and sweet lemongrass. Here is a great tip: grab 5 bars, and they will toss in a handcrafted wooden soap dish too. That dish helps your soap last longer because it dries out between uses. With free shipping on orders over $75, it's easy to stock up or give them as a gift. Take a deep breath, scrub with something real, and feel the difference. Visit halfbackmountainsoap.com today and bring the mountain into your bathroom. Also, you can use code BURROWS10 and get 10% off of your first order.
That's something that Kim Burgess had done. Kim Burgess did a podcast and a book with Gary DeMar, and
Mhm.
he said rather than dissection, he did vivisection, where instead of pulling the things out, then you have the singular and it's no longer the frog. you actually open it up and you watch the
Mm.
system that makes it as the whole frog. It's kind of like you're saying getting the
Yeah.
joke, but he says the very same thing that you do, or he'll say the scriptures is like a diamond
Mm.
with many different facets. You can look at it from a facet, but that's not
Yep.
the whole diamond. You have to remember the whole.
Yep.
And so it's very sometimes it's very
Mm.
it feels daunting, like a very daunting task to get the whole picture, right? You said it's
Yeah.
really that's one of the things I've told the other whenever I was with my cast in the Burrows is that writing, I said when you look at the scriptures, it's like writing on super steroids. It's a totally different kind of style of writing. It shows the
Mm.
level.
Mm.
It's yet another thing that tells me that it's divine, that it comes from the Lord. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's why I really wanted to understand it. And I wanted to ask you a question in regard to something you said earlier. Um, you probably know I have a dear friend, Tim Martin, who wrote with J.L. Vaughn the book Beyond Creation Science, and they have this. It's called Covenant Creation, and they invited me to speak at their conference, knowing that I'm not a covenant creationist. And of course, I brought my view there, and we were comparing notes and talking. But there was one thing that I always enjoyed about Tim and those guys is that they saw something in Genesis 1, a template as well. And so it kind of resounds
Mm.
whenever I hear James Jordan say it or you say it. People are seeing a template and they're applying
Yep.
it. And so I'm just curious,
Mm.
like you've encountered people within covenant creation. I'm not trying to get you into any kind of argument with anybody, but I'm just curious. What
Oh, no, no. And I think uh I can understand how they came to their conclusion.
okay.
Uh and this is where I think this is where both sides fail, because they're relying on proof texting all the time,
Hmm.
generally speaking, and trying to put the puzzle together. And so they because the prophets and of course Revelation uses sort of cosmic language to describe local events, and the Old Testament prophets did that as well. They read that back, as you know, into Genesis 1 and say, well, the world already existed, and this was God giving a covenantal purpose to all of these things, which is a fair enough assertion because, and they rely on Jordan's idea that those things, there is this covenantal process happening in Genesis 1. And I
Hmm.
agree that there is. Um, but there are layers. So um, I see Genesis 1 to 5 as being chiastic or symmetrical, but that is the picture on the box of the puzzle for the whole Bible. And
Okay.
so so the I see the pattern in Genesis 1 to 5, which follows the Gary North's fivefold covenant pattern. Maybe should I cover that first?
If you'd like, yeah, you can
Anyway,
maybe give us a little
yeah,
backstory on that.
just quickly, yeah. I mean, and that's also the pattern that was seen in Deuteronomy, especially with Ray Sutton's book, that you may prosper. But God's covenants have five basic steps, which is we find in everyday life. Number one, God is transcendent; He's the boss. Number two, that's transcendence, hierarchy. He puts somebody in charge as His representative. Number three is ethics, which is what He wants you to do. Number four is oath/sanctions, which is getting you to make an agreement, and there will be blessings and curses depending on whether you carry it out or not. And the final step is succession, which is when God comes back, basically the wicked get cut off and the righteous inherit what was promised.
Hmm.
The succession is always about the future. So that's THEOS, which is a really good acronym. That's a lot of fun. That's
Yeah, that
nice.
is
And you
good.
can,
Theos,
I
yep.
used to get the high school kids to write Theos on their fingers. That right? Okay. Now you see your thumb, how it's separate from the other ones. That's God's transcendence. He is separate.
Ah,
Okay. He
yes.
starts
Hmm.
off. That's it. He's separate, and then the others follow. Um, so Genesis 1 to 5 follows that pattern. So Genesis 1, God is the transcendent creator. He's above all. He's the one that is separate from his creation, but he's the source of everything. In Genesis 2 is hierarchy, and that's where God sets up humanity's basic structure. It's established. Marriage, children, the beginning of culture. Uh, Step 3 is ethics, which is Adam's testing and failure.
Hmm.
So that's this, he broke the law that God had given him. Oath and sanctions is where the outcome of Adam's sin affects society. So Cain's sin was the same sin as Adam's garden sin, but it was in the land, and now it was bloodshed. It was putting kingdom before priesthood. So and then the final step is succession, and that's why Genesis 5, out of nowhere, gives us a genealogy from Adam to Noah, from the beginning of the world to the end of the primeval world. And it's a list of people. It's a list of deaths, as a friend pointed out. I thought, oh, I've never noticed that one before. It says, and such, and he died. Such and such, and he died. It just keeps saying died, 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 died. And
Right.
then you said, and then the flood. It's just like, whoa, okay, well, that's some succession there. It's like succession of death.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I just thought, I mean, how many times have I read that and I never noticed that this one actually just kept mentioning death.
Hmm.
Except for Enoch, which is another story. But so that's THEOS: transcendence, hierarchy, ethics, oath and sanctions, and then succession. And there it is. Those 5 chapters are a little symmetrical, sort of a pericope, if you like. And that gives us the pattern for the whole Bible, in my opinion, because Genesis 1, I believe, is God establishing the physical order,
Okay.
the actual creation. Genesis 2, God establishes a human hierarchy as a representative of the world.
Hmm.
And so Genesis, and people, how people say Genesis 1, Genesis 2 look like 2 separate stories. Like there's an obvious sort of a break. And there's a bit of, it's like these 2 things have been put together. The reason is that Genesis 2 follows the same 7-fold pattern as Genesis 1. So you can actually line up the steps. So you have whatever is in a step, say step 1 in Genesis 1, lines up in a representative way with whatever's in that step in Genesis 2. So it's,
Hmm.
1A, 2A, 1B, 2B, etc.
Right.
And so you can actually see what is the local representative of the global reality in Genesis 1.
Hmm.
And so that it's a deliberate interpretive um, device. That's why
Hmm.
it's, when there's something weird, you go, no, there's something else happening here. There's some logic that I'm not aware of. So that's what's happening. But so the point is that you have the physical order in Genesis 1, the social order in Genesis 2, the attempted establishment of the ethical order in Genesis 3, upon which everything hinged. And then coming back out of the symmetry, you have the social order corrupted, which matches step 2 and 4 in the symmetry. And then you have succession, which is the destruction of the physical order, which is a succession of death and then the destruction in the flood. And
Hmm.
so physical, social, ethical, social, physical. Okay, so stay with me.
Okay. I'm with
We're
you.
nearly there. Yeah, so I believe that in the Bible, we have the same thing. We have a universal physical creational covenant from Adam to Noah, or to the Tower of Babel, basically, where everybody on the earth was in the same covenantal order. Some were blessed, some were cursed, depending on faith or unbelief, but they were all in the same covenant. So, um, and then when you get to Abraham, I believe it was to avoid another global catastrophe because things were going off the rails again. God splits humanity into 2, in a sense, separating Israel. And this is the hierarchy step where God sets up a social model of the world. And as we see, especially under Moses, you have Israel as the land and the
Hmm.
Gentiles as the sea. And that's something Jordan brings out in his Revelation lectures, because whenever Revelation says the earth, it means the land. It's the land
Hmm.
of Israel in that sense. Um, and the Gentiles are the wild sea. Hmm. And then when you get to Christ, then we have the ethical step of sacred history. Christ as a better Adam who obeys God, faces all the same temptations, but also bears the sin of all humanity. And he's at the very center of the pattern of this same sequence, ethics. And then instead of the outcome, as in Genesis 4, where the outcome of that is bloodshed in society, the outcome we're back to the social realm from the ethical realm. But it brings the ethical with it. We have the Spirit of God who's actually reversing that. Men will be gradually turning their swords into plowshares. That's why Jesus gave us his flesh and blood, swords, as bread and wine, plowshares. That's
Okay.
he's doing the opposite of what Cain did. So he's bringing peace through spiritual unity, spiritual fellowship. It does cause, obviously, the gospel causes division, but over time, that's the postmillennial view. Then the world is gradually becoming transformed. And then finally, at the last judgment, we have a return to the physical order. And so that's the important part there, where instead of having a succession of death that leads to the physical destruction of the world and the flood, that was in that initial picture of Genesis 1 to 5. In the big picture, we have Adam to Noah as the physical order, the history of Israel as the hierarchy, as a social order. Then we have Christ bringing a new ethical order in the center as a better Adam. Then we have the church as a spiritual social order, and then we have the final restoration of creation at the end.
Okay.
So what Tim and JL do, they say, well, AD 70 and Revelation are clearly using world model language. The land and the sea refer to the Jews and the Gentiles. Therefore, if we go back to Genesis 1, the land and the sea must refer to people, the nations, etc. And that's not the case. That's the type. But my point is, there is a world model there, but it's not in Genesis 1. It's in Genesis 2. That's where the local representatives are. That's where God set up a representative human social order that stood before God as representatives of the global order. So when man sinned, the whole creation was affected. So
Okay.
sin did bring death into the world. So what they're doing, I think, is kind of missing the fact that there were these layers, the physical order as the basis, then you come up to the social order, look, it's like almost like going up a mountain in a sense, and then you have the ethical order at the top. And so there's this ascent from below to beside to above to then beside then to below in the flood. So yeah, I do think that what they've done is they've actually misaligned the end of the Israelite social order, the world model, the Jewish land and sea. They've misaligned that with what's in Genesis 1 instead of seeing it as a greater fulfillment of what was in Genesis 2, the social
Okay.
world model. So that's the problem. So I can see their point, but we're dealing with a three-decker model where it's a bit, well, that's what Jacob's ladder was. I mean, it's a ziggurat of representation. The closer you got in Israel, from the lepers at the bottom, who were the unclean, they were like the creeping things because they had snake skin. That's what the leprosy was. It was like scaly skin. They were the snakes in a sense at the
Right.
bottom. Not that there was no mercy for them, but that's what the leprosy was. And then then you've got the common Israelites, and then you have the Levites, and then you have the priests, and then you have the high priest. And as you're working up this ziggurat of representation, it's getting harder. You're getting more and more purity required until the high priest he's Adam, and he's the one who is to be the most pure. And that also explains the Levites not having any land to farm, and the tabernacle virgins who were voluntary virgins. So the Levites were bearing the curse on the ground in a symbolic sense, and the virgins were bearing the curse on the womb. And because they were around the tabernacle, that was the Garden of Eden. They were barren in that sense, and they had to rely on other people to supply those things. So and Israel itself is a history of barren wombs. Israel bore the curse on behalf of the nations, so the nations could multiply. So So I think that's the solution to the covenant creation assertion, that
So,
it can Genesis 1 and 2.
sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to ask this
Yeah.
question. So with that in mind, so let me just ask you directly. So, with your understanding of Scripture and the way that it is shaped, not only in the microcosm books of the world, but in the overall from Genesis to Revelation, is it your assessment that there will be an
Sorry.
end to our physical order and then be made new? Is that where you're heading? Are you saying that that's going to happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're consistent. If they believe that all scripture was fulfilled in AD 70, and then I believe they're cutting the end off of history, basically.
Hmm.
There's no final end. And then it does make sense to go back and cut the beginning off of it. Well,
So
you
you would
know.
say that the covenant creationists are actually being more consistent in the full preterist paradigm because they're holding it to that same spiritual
Well,
fulfillment
that's
versus physical, right?
there's a symmetry there, definitely. The
Hmm.
problem is they don't realize that um, AD 70 wasn't the end. It was just the end of the of step two, like the social order. That
Hmm.
was, I mean, it was the end of it began with Christ, because there's an overlap, obviously. Um, so they're kind of they've got their chiasm misaligned.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the center of history, the beginning of the new ethical order, so in a sense it's a lot of how can I put it, in the initial order of the world from Adam to Noah and a bit beyond. The order is physical, social, and ethical.
Hmm.
But then when you move to Abraham and to the history of Israel, the focus shifts to the social. It's circumcision was an ethical demarcation. The law enforced that ethical demarcation. Israel had obligations that the Gentiles didn't have. So
Hmm.
it's a social order, that it's a division of flesh in that sense. That's another reason why I'm not a pedo-Baptist, but that's another story.
Right. Okay.
I see that as a purely ethical sign. It's not. There's social outcomes, but it's not a social demarcation like circumcision was. Um, and so then it's the focus is, it's physical becomes sort of secondary. It's more social ethical. Israel was a social demarcation with an ethical goal, or telos, that
Hmm.
the promises and the savior was coming. They were bringing the savior. Then you go Christ, and even though he's a physical person and he's socially Jewish, the primary focus there is the ethical, because it's
Hmm.
all about his true glory was the spiritual glory of his obedience to the Father. And so
Okay.
that's the ethical. And then as you come out to the church brings the ethical spirit, the spirit of Christ, into a new social order. So it's, once again, it's sort of ethical. Now it's ethical social, which is the sort of the focus. And then the final restoration of creation is ethical, social, physical is the final
Hmm.
thing, and that's the destruction of death. So I think they just kind of, the layers are all related. As I like to say, they're linked, but they're distinct. And so uh, the other thing you see in Genesis 1 to 5 is the pattern of world, land, garden, land, world. God created the world. He raises, forms Adam from the ground, from the land, lifts him up as like a human first fruits into the garden.
Hmm.
And then the action moves in Genesis 4 again out into the land, and then you have the first true king, Lamech, which is an anagram of Melech, king, and he's a bad guy. He establishes the practices for all later kings, murder and adultery. You know,
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's what kings do, because number one, you have to murder your rivals, and you
Hmm.
have to outbreed them. So polygamy was always about having more kids. It was like stealing fruit from God. I'm not going to wait for God to open the womb. I'm just going to have lots of wives. That's
Right.
what they
Okay.
did.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, and then you have back to the physical. So world, land, garden, land, world. So I believe that's once again the picture for the whole of history, where you have Adam to Noah was a worldwide covenant. then Israel's history, there's a split. The covenant with Abraham, etc., functions within the Noahic covenant. The Noahic covenant was still operating. The Gentiles were still under that order, but Israel was representing them because the Noahic priesthood had failed. And so Israel's like a human shield, and they're bearing the blessings and curses on behalf of the whole world. So instead of God sending a flood of water, he sends a flood of troops. As in
Yes.
I've noticed in Isaiah, it's like, yeah, well, I'm going to bring Assyria, and he's going to come in and cover the land up to the neck, so that Jerusalem will be like, but you'll still be
Right.
able to, you'll survive.
Hmm.
So yeah, but only just, and then Babylon then comes in and is it covers absolutely everything. And then Isaiah 44, I think it talks about God raising up, like drying up the rivers and raising Israel again from the waters. So,
Hmm.
but it's a metaphor, obviously, because the nations were the sea. And of course, when you get to the New Testament, it's all about fishermen, and that's because the
Right.
fish are the Gentiles, which that's a common thing now, thanks to James Jordan. Um, so it's world, land, garden, land, world, and so looking at it from that perspective, they they mess up by conflating the land language of Revelation with the world language of Genesis 1. Whereas the
Mm.
land language actually corresponds with what's going on in Genesis 2, which is local representatives. So the world model thing is there, it's just
Hmm.
not in Genesis 1. So,
Yeah, I mean, because honestly, and I appreciate that. I'm just, that's one of the things that I learned when I was at the Covenant Creation Conference was that they were definitely seeing something in these structures. And if you say, like, again, for me to say that they got it wrong, the only thing that I've ever said is that I felt like they were back engineering the Bible, that the beginning is the physical order, although it is there are people like John Walton who have written books saying it's not about ex nihilo, but it's ex materia. Something was already there, and so it's being
mm,
ordered by Elohim and all that. So, but
yeah, yeah,
I've always looked at it as kind of like a back engineering, kind of like when you mentioned the flood of troops, which is similar to what the flood of water was. Sometimes what I'll see are people take that idea, and when they read Genesis, they'll say, "Oh, that's actually not talking about water now; it's talking about
yeah,
armies."
yep,
And so it's back
yep,
engineering. It's not letting the thing that becomes the symbol that is used later have its
yep.
day in court. It's got to have its day in court before it can actually be used later.
Well, yeah, that's right. An actual physical reality for there to be a local
Hmm.
representative of it. So reading it back into it, they say, well, Adam was called from among other existing people and made the head of, or attempted to be made the head of the covenant. I'd say no, that person who was called, set apart, was Abraham. He
Hmm.
was set apart from the nations. So you're reading, even though there are typological correspondences between Adam and Abraham.
Hmm.
Adam was given fertile ground and a fertile womb and promises. Abraham was given a barren womb and a barren ground, all the famines. Like Canaan was not a particularly good place at the time, and
Hmm.
that's why Lot had to leave. That's the other thing, is like, oh, it's fertile down there. It's like that's the devil always saying, hey, like,
Yes,
here's
yes.
look at the fruit down there.
Right.
It's the same story over and over again. Am I going to wait on God's blessing, or am I going to take a shortcut from the devil?
Sure.
Yeah,
I
so
often wondered, I often wondered, I've seen where within the full preterist world, I know, again, I'm going to bring up Tim Martin. Tim Martin is a dear, dear friend of mine. I love him and his family so much. They're wonderful, and I think he's a brilliant man. But he's actually challenged, other people within full preterists, particularly David Curtis at Berean Bible Church, in regard to his views of Genesis and his views of the eschatology of the
mm,
scriptures. And he's challenged him, and I've often wondered if it would be better suited for someone like yourself, or James Jordan, or somebody who actually is looking at Genesis in a similar light, the way that they are, but you have a structure that shows where to place it. That to me seems like that would be a better debate, because
yeah.
and you're
Oh,
comparing
look, it's
apples and
and it's
apples.
it's the same. It's the same as the debate, like especially at the moment, over like Gary DeMar looking at the inconsistencies within partial preterism.
Right.
And also and within the verses that were used to write the creeds. And I thought, you
Hmm.
look, he's highlighting real problems.
Okay.
And like he's done a much more sort of a thorough job. But I picked these things up as well,
Hmm.
before, especially looking at Mike, what's his name? Full preterist
Sullivan?
guy.
Sullivan?
Yes,
Yeah, he's a good friend of
yes,
mine. Yeah, Mike.
yeah. We I guess we had a falling out. I mean, I just kept saying Mike, world, land, garden, land, world, and then he just kind of, that was it.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah,
Mike actually,
I
I know he can be hard online too. He can be hard online, but he's actually a genuinely sweet person. Him
oh,
and his wife
sure,
both.
no, and
Yeah, and
also
I
the
wish
work.
you guys could actually have a conversation and it
Well,
not go to
well,
blows.
we did, but it's just I think he just thought no, that we can't. The structure is not an answer. That was his decision, and
Hmm.
but his work on look, just laying it out and saying, look, the language in this chapter is the same as the language in this chapter. There's no way they're talking about two different events. I'm like, yeah, of course, you're exactly right.
Hmm.
So I mean, like I said, it's a group project, and everyone brings something. I think it was James Jordan who years ago when he was looking at Romans 9 to 11, and he said, well, I think it was Don Preston's work, but he said, look, Don Preston's a full preterist, so he has to force Romans 9 to 11, has to see them as being. I don't think they're forced. I think they has to see them as being fulfilled before AD 70. And he said, you know what? I think he's right.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's good.
And
That, wow.
yeah. So, but the thing is, Preston came to that opinion because of his view on things. But I think that is within that context, and it actually makes a lot of sense when you read it that way. You just go, yeah, that's actually what's happening. And it just amazes me now that people can look at that passage and not see it. They say,
Hmm.
"Oh, no, no, I'll stick with the standard Reformed view that there will be a mass convert." Look, there still might be a mass conversion of Jews in the future, but there's no, as Jordan points out, in God's eyes, there's no such thing as Jews anymore in any
Right.
covenantal sense. That
Hmm.
that there's no legal office of Jew as there was, and that's what it was. There's obviously ethnic Jews, and someone said, "Why do you think they are still around?" And I said, "Well, it's like Lot's wife, like they're there as a reminder." I mean, anyone can become Jewish and anyone can leave Judaism, but as an ethnic identity, it's still around because it's a reminder of the
Hmm.
past. It's like a museum in a lot of ways, but it also is a sign that was an office that God established. But I don't think,
Honestly, it breaks my heart what all that ethnic group have been through over the course of history.
yeah,
As a
exactly,
reminder,
yeah.
they have really taken it, on the
Yeah, and
chin
and
for
and and from
millennia.
Christians,
Yeah.
it's funny though because it's sort of, you know, you love the people, and it doesn't matter who they are. You want to love the people, but you go hard on the doctrine, and that's
Hmm.
what is difficult because people, they don't seem to be able to sort of separate that.
I am one of those people who have a difficulty separating it because I live out my faith. I'm a very
Yeah,
practical person, and
yeah,
the things that I believe, they operate in my world all of the time. So what you see is what you get. And so when I'm online or I'm in person, you're getting the same guy. So if you're like you're an idiot, then all of a sudden, you might be saying what you're saying right here is idiotic, but you're not the idiot.
yeah.
But I'm taking it like,
Oh,
oh, so
yeah.
I'm an idiot. Now, I don't get upset and start lashing out, but I just
Oh
say,
no, I
you
just
know what I
meant
mean?
sort of more like more like loving, say, loving Muslims, loving your Muslim neighbors, and yet
Hmm.
being able to say, well, look, I'm sorry, what you believe is wrong. Like there's
Hmm.
just I have no qualms with saying that it's wrong.
Right.
You're human beings, and I believe Christ died for you, and I'm going to love you in every possible way. But and I would do that with anybody that's not a
Hmm.
Christian. But also, it's with Judaism, it's a bit different because it has been given a bit of a free pass, and then now that people are kind of digging into the Talmuds and some of the stuff that's written in there. But once again, that's not mainstream Judaism. Like there's some
Right.
pretty shocking stuff. I just imagine a bunch of Jewish guys sitting around writing all this nasty stuff because they can, and it's
Hmm.
like, and it's been preserved, but it's like I doubt whether many Jewish people have read it.
Right.
It's
Sure. Can I
It's
ask
just
you one
not.
other question?
Yeah, you can ask.
I
Oh, I love questions. I mean,
okay.
I've got 6 hours, so you know.
Oh. Well, so I'll say this. In your estimation, in your understanding of the scriptures, can you tell me what is the significance of the removal of the temple and the city of Jerusalem by the Romans? Yes, we're going to say 80, 70, or 66 to 70. I know you talk about, pushing everything into that position, but can you tell me what is the overarching thing that we should think of as believers? And did the
Mm.
church fathers understand it? Did the early patristics understand it? What happened in 80, 70, and does it matter to what the Bible's talking about?
Oh, look, I think it's crucial. I think it's the
Hmm.
context of the New Testament. You can't understand, like say, uh, reading. I've heard so many sermons on parts of the book of Hebrews that they just miss the point because they're not realizing who it was written to and why. Also, the other epistles. I mean, when Peter was writing, he was mostly writing to Jewish Christians when he's talking about persecution, not entirely, but they were the ones that were really copying it from other Jews. The
Hmm.
Jewish rulers and the Judaizers are the big villains in the New Testament. Nero doesn't come into the picture until AD 64 when all that stuff, when I believe the canon was finished. So,
Hmm.
and even then, it wasn't Rome so much as Nero. That's one thing
Hmm.
I've learned. It was Rome itself was like, but Nero was like, I hate these guys.
Yeah. Hmm.
It was personal. So yeah. But when Peter talks about persecution, one thing I've always wondered when he said, we talked about Jesus going and preaching to the dead, and that's one of those things that Roman Catholics love to riff on, write fan fiction about.
Right.
Maybe the church fathers too. There's the harrowing of hell, all this stuff. I'm like, actually, no. Thanks to James Jordan, I can see that in the fifth seal, where Jesus, after his ascension in Revelation 4 and 5, one of the things is he goes and preaches to the martyrs and says, "Well, it's nearly time," and they're like, well, and they're like John the Baptist in prison. They're like, well, okay, are you going to avenge us now? And he's like, no, not yet. There's,
Hmm.
but basically because he's given Israel another 40 years,
Hmm.
as Paul says, so they would not be cut off instantly like Sodom and Gomorrah. They're going to be threshed by the gospel, and that's a mercy. There will be a remnant saved, and also that will help bring the Gentiles in because you know they'll have time when they see the gospel going out, and then the Jews will be provoked when they see Gentiles believing, so more Jews will get saved. And Paul says this is really cunning stuff. Like, God is so tricky.
Yeah.
It's like when Jesus mentioned Naaman the Syrian and the widow of Sidon, and they got really angry because he's pointing out these faithful Gentiles. How dare
Hmm.
you? And then the Canaanite woman as well, when Jesus says, well, why would I give the bread to the dogs under the table? And he's been deliberately provocative. He's just like sort of, basically get lost. And then she calls his bluff. And she's like, like, oh, that's not, I'm sorry, but, I'm not going to accept that. And then he says, look at this faith. So, he
Yes.
would say things to put people off. And that's where if the Spirit of God is at work, no, they're not going to give up. They're going to like, no, I'm sorry, you don't get away with that. Like,
Mhm. Yes.
so that's one thing I've noticed. That's a book that I've almost finished writing, which I haven't really. It's been put on hold a bit. It's been a busy year. But it's just the ministry of provocation, where all the way through the Bible, you've just got people doing things to get people to expose who they are. And
That sounds fantastic. I would love to read that.
oh, but
All
well,
the provocations.
oh, well, I mean, one of them I believe was Abraham, when he knew that Pharaoh would have to, if Abraham said that Sarah was his sister and she was his half sister, I think,
Hmm.
um, then Pharaoh would have to negotiate with him for Sarah, but he
Hmm.
didn't. He took her, and so Pharaoh exposed his heart, and God cursed Pharaoh. But it was a test. And then later on, people say, oh, and Abraham didn't learn. He did the same. He lied again with Abimelech. And it's like, no. He was testing Abimelech again. And this time Abimelech was a righteous man. And God said, hey, like this guy's, and then also with Lot offering his daughters, they go, how how could he do that? Like Lot sat in the gate of the city. He knew these guys and they knew
Hmm.
him. And so, he knew what they would say when he offered his daughters. He knew they would say no, but when they actually verbalized it and acted on that, that would condemn them. And I think it's because, it says Jesus knew their hearts, but he would say things to get people to reveal who they were so that when God judged them, there'd be no question of his justice. They would
Hmm.
expose who they were. And the best example is Solomon when he says, cut the baby in half.
Right.
And it always reminded me of a Brady Bunch episode, when growing up, when they had a I think they'd had a car accident or something, and the guy that played Uncle Fester in the Adams Family played this man who was taken to court, and he had this big neck brace thing on, and whatever. And there's one scene where Mike Brady's off to the side, and he just drops a suitcase on the ground, and the guy turns and goes like that, and then they go, "Aha!"
Right.
And so he revealed that he wasn't injured at all. So
Hmm.
and then when Jesus said, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, and people say, aha, transubstantiation. No, 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 no. He was being deliberately provocative.
Hmm.
Some people turned away, but others are like, no, no, no. There's something else going on here, and it's the
Hmm.
Spirit of God that draws us. So I think that the ministry of provocation is a big deal, because sometimes God will hide his face and say something to. I mean, the Bible itself is like that. When unbelievers wrestle with the scriptures to their own destruction because they're just like, oh, what's he, but
Right.
it, or they get to the point where they read something and go, see, I'm vindicated, the Bible's wrong, or it's unjust, or it's brutal, or this, that, whatever else. I'm like, yeah, a believer's going to go, no, no, there's something else going on here.
That
And
is
they'll
for
keep
sure. That is for sure.
they'll
And I can
keep
also
they'll
say
keep looking.
the Good Samaritan to me is a very provocative, story
Mm.
because automatically he's showing that the Levitical priesthood is not kind and compassionate and that but the
Yeah,
Samaritan that you hate, this racial
yeah,
slur that would come out of their mouths about these people, he's like, no, that's the one that you need to model after. That's very
yeah.
provocative, right?
Oh yeah, he just constantly pushed people's buttons,
Hmm.
and I think it's because when there's peace, and that's something James Jordan brings out at the beginning of Zechariah, when the Lord sends the horses out and they come back and say, "Oh, everything's at peace," and he said the Lord is not happy with this peace because it's the peace of compromise. It's
Mm.
man's peace. It's not God's
Yes.
peace. God's like, no, Jesus, like, I'm gonna bring a sword because this is not the kind of peace that is good. This is
Hmm.
your solution. You have brought peace. It's a bit like Israel in Isaiah's time, where he describes them as being covered in scabs and all sorts of things and poor, but they weren't at the time. They were actually really prosperous.
Hmm.
But it's a bit like Laodicea, where he's saying, no, no, spiritually the reason, and something I hadn't realized until fairly recently, was the reason that what the big reason for their idolatry and bringing an end to the false gods was trade. Yeah, it's easier to
Ah.
trade with other nations, so it was basically selling out for the sake of commerce. And so Revelation picks that up when it talks about Jerusalem and her commerce, which is spiritual commerce as well, because
Hmm.
of the people, the money changes in the temple. But the whole thing is compromised with Roman statecraft for for the kind of maintenance of peace, which is not the peace that God brings. And
Would you
so,
say that Israel uses the same kind of um, compromising tactics to win a war or to win a fight? For example, whenever this other tribe wanted to intermarry with them, and then they said, "Okay, but you have to be circumcised to be a part of our thing," and so they circumcise them, and then while they're sitting there sore, they kill them all. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like they're
well, I
opposite
mean,
of compromise.
I it, I think that was the Shechemites. Yeah, they
Yes.
and it's interesting because I'm not really the best with biblical geography. I've drawn quite a few maps for people over the years, and I've got a pretty good idea of where most things are now. Not the tribal boundary so much. That's just so complicated, and it kind of changes. But Shechem was right between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, which is where the
Hmm.
blessings and the curses were pronounced. And Mount Ebal was barren, the curses mountain, was barren, and Mount Gerizim is green, which is, it's just perfect, the blessings and the curses. So that happened later on, but it was the gateway into the land. And so you've got this terrible thing happening, where circumcision is used as a trap, in a sense.
Mhm.
I mean, the Shechemites showed that they were honorable and they wanted to join, and they were quite, the whole point was that that was allowed later on, that people could come and actually join the nation. You had to be circumcised and you would join the nation, and then you would inherit the promises. It's a bit like the was it the Midianite women? People say, oh, it was sex slavery. They took the virgins. I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, but they would have married them off to men who had a stake in the promised land. Like that's not what was happening. These women
Mhm.
were given an inherit. They were rescued and given an inheritance. So I think no, I think that was just the idea of being absolutely merciless, and it was a bad
Mm.
testimony. And it was only the Lord that protected Jacob's family by making them afraid of him. I mean, Jacob's response was right. He's like, "You guys really messed up. Like, this is just, you know."
Yeah.
And that's another thing, that the theme of intermarriage, which I believe begins in Genesis 6, and runs right to the end of the Bible. So when Jesus says, it'll be as it was in the days before the flood, where they were eating and drinking the fruit of the ground
Mhm.
promised to Adam and to Abraham, and marrying and giving in marriage the fruit of the womb promised to Adam and promised to Abraham. Um, and so the idea is the difference between good intermarriage, like Boaz and Ruth, where the bride is a believer, she comes in, and the bad intermarriage, like those in Ezra and Nehemiah, who'd married pagan women who were raising pagan children, and they had to annul the marriages. And so,
Mhm.
the reunion of Jew and Gentile was like the devil's answer to the church, which was the faithful union of Jew and Gentile, was a conspiracy between the Jewish rulers and Rome as an alliance against the church, a spiritual alliance. That was his answer. It's like, well,
Mhm.
if you guys are going to get together, I'll do the same thing. It's like Herod and Pilate becoming friends, and we're
Yes.
going to wipe Jesus out. It's just the
Mhm.
bigger version of what happened in Jesus. So intermarriage is another factor there. So the intermarriage with the Shechemites, I don't think God would have had a problem with it. I think it was probably early days, and it wasn't was probably a bit too early. They were still a tribe. It would have possibly
Right.
confused things as far as the genealogies went, but it was still a terrible thing to do.
All right, here's my secret. I've been pretending to be a kitchen genius. Pans clanging, timers dinging, me yelling stuff like, chef's kiss. But in reality, it's all thanks to my secret ingredient. So let me break it down for you. First up, everything seasoning. And yes, I mean everything. And it delivers. Chicken, nailed it. Fish, incredible. Veggies, now there's your chef's kiss. Mashed potatoes, don't even get me started. And look, I've even pushed the limits with this stuff. I sprinkled it on popcorn. Amazing. I even tried it on squirrel. Do I regret it? Absolutely. Trust me, everything seasoning makes everything better, whether you're cooking gourmet or going a little off-road. Now, the main event, steakhouse seasoning. This isn't just seasoning, it's grill dominance in a jar. You hit a steak with this stuff, and suddenly you're channeling your inner Hank. Who's Hank, you ask? Hank's that flannel-wearing, boot-stomping, truck-driving king of the grill. He can chop down trees with his bare hands and grills a T-bone so good you'll want to slap Gordon Ramsay's mama right in the mouth. I grilled burgers with Steakhouse last weekend, and my buddy goes, man, I really need this recipe. And I shot him. No, I just told him that I'd leave it in my will. So if you're ready to cook like a legend and keep your secret weapon close, head to mysecretblends.com. That's www.mysecretblends.com and use code BURROS, that's BURROS, at checkout for 20% off of your first order. So shake it, serve it, and when they ask you, just smile and say, it's my little secret. My secret ingredient.
Get it today at www.mysecretblends.com and use Burrows to get 20% off of your first order.
First of all, I want to thank you so much for being with me today and talking to me today. I'd wanted to do this, and I would like to do a follow-up with you later. I think it would be great. I love just picking your brain. This is going to be great. But
Oh
can
yeah, well,
you?
it's I've lots and lots of I mean any question. I mean I love questions, but it's the attitude of like no, the answer's here somewhere, and it has
Mhm.
to be consistent with the rest of Scripture, and it has to. And one thing I learned from Jordan is that these themes just come up. There's one thing we've done with the Kenyan school. The notes for that is we spent. I think they got a bit tired of it because they said, oh, we just keep looking at these biblical themes, and I
Mhm.
said, yeah, they're going to come in really handy, because they're the things that are constant threads, and every time they come up you need to be able to identify them again as part of the same story, because so often we look at things in isolation, and we don't go, oh, okay, this is referring to something that happened back in season 2, and this is
Yeah,
now
yeah.
season 7, and I'm trying to make sense of it, and it's difficult when, like, if you watch a long running TV show and someone says something and they make a season a year, and they're referring to something that happened 5 years ago, really. And
Hmm. Right.
then that's when you've got to go online and go, what did that mean? Oh, that was, so the Bible's a bit like that. But look, I think the Bible's written to provoke questions,
Hmm.
deliberately. It's, God says things to deliberately make you go, what?
Yeah, it's the
So,
part of the relationship. It's the part of the relationship we have with him because I found that to be true even in my own just my life and just
mm,
the way when I read the scriptures that it does once the questions begin and you really start digging, that's when you really begin to know him more and more. So
yeah.
absolutely. Well, let's tell our listeners where they can find your work. So because I'm sure that this has whetted their appetites to see what you're talking about. So where do they find the Bible Matrix and some of your writings?
Best place to go is biblematrix.com.au. Make sure you put the .au on the end, because I think there's a biblematrix.com that predates mine, but I
Hmm.
don't know what that is. It's just some, yeah. So biblematrix.com.au. It's haven't been posting there a huge amount recently because there's a link there to all the books on Amazon as well, and there's a welcome page that'll sort of give you a bit of an intro. Um, cu- Currently working on a video course. I've been meaning to do it for years, but you know, because I've been doing the notes for this Kenyan class, and there's this pastor in Kenya, Kennedy, his name is, who we met on Twitter on X about 4 or 5 years ago, and he's just as sharp as a tack. So he'd be, asking questions, and he got a whole lot of really good theology books from an American missionary who was retiring, and he was reading this stuff, and he said there was nothing. The Bible teaching in Kenya is pretty poor. Like, it's just, I mean,
Hmm.
lack of literacy in some places, especially rural areas, has something to do with it. But he said, there's a lot of people who think that just because they're gifted speakers, they have the unction of the Spirit. And he said they preach things, and then other people repeat them, and there's a bit of syncretism with, sort of, I don't know about spiritism, but, and also there's prosperity gospel. You've got some churches, some preachers teaching that you need to keep some of the laws from the Old Testament. It's a real mess. So he said, no, I'm going to start doing some classes. So he's really the engine there. But me having a weekly deadline of writing notes means that I've actually been forced to put all this stuff together for a video course, which I'll be putting together next year. So it's been, I reckon that's been the Lord cracking the whip, saying you really need to do this. Just,
Yeah, so
and
would you consider once you get that video course complete, would you consider coming back on the podcast and talking about it and then so we can point them to it because
yeah, yeah.
that would be
Oh, for
good.
sure. And it's mostly just assembling stuff that I've written, but because all of these people are doing this course are already in ministry, um, And there's a bit of a range of education and training there, but having an actual audience in mind has been really helpful
Mhm.
for me to actually kind of target it. So yeah, it takes you sort of through the basics of reading scripture, typology, symbolism, and the structure, and then we just sort of do a general sort of overview of the Bible. So the course in Kenya actually starts with a module that Kennedy mostly wrote, which is really just a survey of the Bible and basic doctrines and things that a lot of them don't have, and that's really helpful stuff too. But it made me realize how much we take for granted.
Mhm.
But they're lapping it up. They are so hungry. Like they're having a ball.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
and
that's
they're
fantastic.
so keen. So
Yeah.
yeah, look, I'd love to do that. It's probably going to be, there's a platform I found that's just really sort of come of age now, and they give you a classroom, and you can put the courses on there and everything, and people can chat and stuff. So I think that's going to be the way to go, because there's always questions, and I really love questions because it's a bit like a friend of mine who used to work. He was paid by a telecommunications company to hack into their system to
Mhm.
find the holes,
Mhm.
and they paid him to do it. And for me, when people question stuff, it's really good, because it's like, I hadn't thought of that. Does my system hold up? So yeah, questions are great, but yeah, I'd love to come back and talk again. That'd be good. And like as you can probably see, I could just talk for days, really.
That makes you great for a podcaster. That's awesome. Well, if you would, Michael,
Yeah,
if you
but
would, hang on. I'd like you to hang on. As we end this recording, I'd like you
sure.
to stay on with me and talk after. But guys, anybody who's watching this on Patreon, you can go into the show notes and you can see thebiblematrix.com.au to be able to see Michael Bull's work. And also, if you're listening, whether you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, it's also in the show notes. I've got a link there for you. Just click and you can go to it. I've already started that, and it has been absolutely fascinating. You're not gonna walk away from it very easily. It's very, very fascinating. So check it out. Michael Bull, thank you so much for being on the Burrows, man. It meant a lot to me, and I look
Good on
forward to
you.
having you come back once you have
Thanks,
your
Vic.
video
Yeah,
series done.
my pleasure.
All right. Well, you
Yeah,
take
good on
care.
you. Thanks, Vic.
All right.